Hello, dear listener. Welcome to the Future Seeds podcast. I'm your host, Cyprian, and in this show, I explore groundbreaking solutions to our world's unique problems by connecting seemingly unrelated fields such as technology, ecology, community, and spirituality. In this episode, I interview Shadé Zahrai. Shadé is a former lawyer, but she also holds a Bachelor in psychology, a Diploma in positive psychology, and is also trained to be a leadership coach. The list of her mentions and achievements is really impressive, just to name a few. She was twice a finalist for the Telstra Women in Business Awards. She's a TED and TEDx presenter, and she was featured in the New York Times, Yahoo Finance, Forbes, Adriana, Huffington's Thrive Global, Vice, the Daily Mail, and many more. What the internet says of her is that she has supernatural abilities to translate neuroscience and psychology research into practical, actionable strategies to accelerate success. As such, in this episode, Shadé and I explore the positive psychology model for happiness, namely the PERMA Model, and then go through different voices, the different inner critics that haunt us and often keep us from thriving. This is Future Seeds, planting a different narrative into the soil of our minds, one podcast at a time. Can you tell us how studying psychology helps you become a better person and a better businesswoman?
Absolutely. I always had a passion for human behavior, what goes on in people's minds, what drives their actions and their decisions. And that started from a very young age. I was very observant. I was always a people watcher. And so when it came to obviously choosing something to study at university, I was pushed down a path of doing law because I did really well in university, but I managed to do it with psychology, which was great, satisfying that innate need that I had to learn more about people. And it's amazing that back then, I didn't even realize the impact that understanding psychology would have on my career trajectory, but also on just understanding what it is that makes people tick. What is going on behind the surface that leads people to make certain decisions, to achieve this goal over that goal, to be happy, or to live a life where they're constantly comparing themselves to each other and ultimately end up miserable. So, I feel like understanding the basis of human behavior and what's going on up here, it really should be taught in school. And I know some high schools do have that in terms of part of the, something that they can choose if they wish to. But I feel like it even needs to be taught to children. Because when children
Yeah.
understand what drives their actions and that other people have desires and needs and wants that are different to theirs, it just gives them this additional insight into who they are, but also how the world works and how the world operates. I feel like it would be so beneficial. But it's definitely been that underlying theme in everything that I've done. And almost everything that I talk about comes back to that.
Yeah, and can you tell us though, so what are the main, I don't know, highways of problems and issues that people deal with when it comes to their mind?
There's probably too many to touch on, but I'll share the ones that I come across the most. So you mentioned positive psychology being an area that I'm especially involved in. And the reason why I selected that is I remember when I was studying at university, a lot of what we were looking at was the traditional understanding of psychology, which is that it's called a deficit model, where you take a functioning human and you look at everything that's under here that's preventing them from being able to function. Trauma, psychopathology, anything that's in their way, PTSD, all of these things. So you're looking at personality disorders, etc. And while it was fascinating, as I started advancing in my career and being in the workplace, I realized that there's a lot more that we need to do to also help people who are not necessarily down here, but who are kind of functioning
Hmm.
fine, but they want to actually take it to the next level and flourish. And that's what positive psychology is. It's the flourishing of the individual. And so when I do a lot of my work with my coaching, working with leaders and teams around the world through the business that we run, we're looking at that space up there. So how do you take the functioning person and actually help them level up so that they can achieve greater things in their life, so they can have more fulfillment, so they can basically achieve their goals and have a greater sense of meaning. So what we see up there, because I'm not going to go into the trauma and all the other pieces, but what we see up here that holds people back, and actually I should probably caveat all this and say that as adults, we are shaped by the experience that we've had in our early years. You know, the first 7 years of our lives are so integral in shaping our sense of self and shaping how we see our place in the world and our sense of confidence and what we want to achieve. And so even some of the challenges that we have in adulthood actually link back to things that you saw, the care that you received or didn't receive, all of these things. But kind of that aside, what I see a lot of is, especially in the professional working world, whether people are employees or entrepreneurs, there's a lot of comparison. Comparing yourself with everyone else that you see, especially, you know, social media has really amplified this comparison tendency that we have, because we know how social media works. People will, you know, design a photo to present their best possible self, which is actually not reflective of who they are. But they then post that, making it seem as though that's what their life is like. And then we see that and then think, why is my life not like their life? And then we're living in this state of lack. Why do they have that and I don't? How come they've achieved that and I haven't? I'm not good enough. I'm not where they are. I'm never going to get ahead. And this can be really detrimental to someone's sense of self-confidence, to their sense of purpose in life. When you're constantly judging yourself based on everyone else, what does that do to your sense of self-worth? You're basically telling yourself that you are no one unless you are better than others. And you know, there's all of these negative consequences that can come from that. It also, when you're stuck doing that, you can become very critical towards others as well. So rather than looking at them and being inspired by what they've achieved, you start to try and attack them. And that's a reflection of your state. And so I always say, you know, whenever, you know, this year has been a really interesting one for us because we've kind of exploded on social media. We have more than 500,000 followers on TikTok and various other platforms. But you know, when you're more in the public eye, you're also more exposed to people that don't like what you do. It's just part and parcel of it. And I always say what Gary Vee says. Yeah, I'm sure you're very aware of it too. You know, Gary Vee always says, if you have someone who is unhappy and is sharing that with you, you know, hate comment or whatever, you have to have compassion towards that person, because you've got to think, what are they going through? Where is their sense of self-worth right now for them to feel like that's an appropriate course of action to tear someone else down? And I love that kind of thinking, because it also reminds you that everyone is on their own journey. Everyone is going through their own challenges, their own struggles, and you can never pass judgment on another. So having that compassion is really important. So that's kind of one thing I see a lot of, people comparing themselves. And when they reach out to me, they, you know, often what I'm helping them do is just helping them stop comparing themselves to everyone else and get really clear on what is it that you need to achieve in your life for you to be happy, not to beat that person and have a house like that person and get 3 cars like that person. What is it that at the end of your life, you're going to look back on and say, yes, that's what I was here to do?
So finding purpose, finding meaning, finding your calling is, from what I hear, a big part of helping people deal with their mental health.
Absolutely.
Right. That's very interesting. It seems that it's become the holy grail these days to have, like, there's all those courses, find your purpose, find your mission out there. There's so many of them.
It's a very profitable industry, that's for sure.
Incredibly. Which is a very interesting topic. I love myself. I've studied the Ikigai, and I love the whole thing. I've decomposed the words. Vocation is different from profession. It's different from mission. It's different from purpose, etc. What truth do you see in all of that? How do you actually help someone that's a little bit lost to see clear in what their own journey, their own path, their own calling is?
It's a really good question, and it's one that so many people are seeking. And I'm a big believer that, you know, when we're looking at this space of kind of positive psychology, because it comes out of that in terms of the research that's been done, there are actually 5 areas that need to be fulfilled or 5 elements in order for someone to feel like they are fulfilled and satisfied with life and actually happier. And so meaning is a big one of it, but it's one of 5. And I think if I take you through the other 4, it will help it'll help make sense as to why meaning is then this kind of missing piece. And it's called the PERMA Model, and it was established by Martin Seligman, who is known as being the father of modern positive psychology. And so the premise is that these 5 core elements provide the foundational pieces that we need, or pieces of the puzzle for subjective well-being and subjective happiness. And the first one is around positive emotions. And the reason why I'm going to share all of these is because, if you take someone who is basically hasn't met or satisfied these others, it becomes really sometimes challenging to then think about, well, what is my purpose? Because they're actually missing pieces of their puzzle. So, it's a good way to think about it in terms of this puzzle. The first one is positive emotions. And it's the extent to which, if you reflect on your day, how many moments of the day are you actually in a more positive state? And bear in mind that when we talk about positive and negative, psychologists will often use that delineation. It's not necessarily good or bad, but positive just refers to a lighter state, more optimism, more hope. And so you want to ask yourself how, within the day, if I started just taking a stock take of how I feel every hour, how many points of time would I be feeling actually happy and satisfied and calm, as opposed to frustrated and irritable and stressed and anxious? And that's your very first set point. When we think about positive emotions, people sometimes think it's just how you are. But actually what we know, and I wrote a book a couple of years ago on the art and science of happiness. And I basically just looked at all the research out there and consolidated it into a super, super quick and short guide. But what I discovered is that happiness is not something you are, it's something you do. And it's not just a state that you'll magically find yourself in. It's actually a set of behaviors and actions that you have to apply. So when we're thinking about this state of being in a positive state, you think about, what am I doing to help myself get there? So that's kind of the first one. It's this optimism in terms of how you see the world. The second one, so that's P from the PERMA model. The second one is E, engagement. And this one's really interesting. And I have personally felt the impacts of this. This is about having things in your life where you can be fully immersed in them and fully engaged in them. And when you're in them, time flies. So in your case, I imagine music is something where you reach a state of flow. So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is the psychologist who's looked into this state of flow and what actually happens where we do lose the relationship between us and the moment and time. And that's why it feels like time flies, because we don't have that conception of time anymore. And that's really healthy to have these moments where you go into this state, because it's an absolute state of mindfulness, but still activating, the right parts of the brain in this sort of active relaxation. So music, creativity, dance, art, these are all seen to be...
Is it something like you should have a certain amount of flow state per day for your mental health?
Yeah, look, I would say so. I actually don't know what the research says about sort of daily, but I would say that it would absolutely enhance your sense of happiness and fulfillment. If you can, for example, if you can play a little bit of music every day, I imagine you feel a lot better, a lot lighter, a lot more able to tackle, challenging things.
Sure.
For me, I find walking and allowing my mind to just be creative, that's when I'm in my kind of engagement state. So that's the second one. It's blissful immersion into something. Who would have thought that that's actually really important for our sense of self and happiness? So that's E. The next one is R, PER from PERMA. That's relationships. Now, in Western societies that a lot of us live in, there's this big push towards individualism. Go out there and achieve your goals, and it's all about you. It doesn't matter who you step on to get there. What we actually know from decades worth of research is that we are social creatures. We thrive in communities. We thrive when we have quality relationships with others, quality connection with others. And, when you think about what happens when you don't have connection, social isolation, social rejection, when we're at risk of these things, what research has found, in fact, Matthew Lieberman from UCLA was looking into some research, looking at fMRI scans and what happens to the brain. When we're at risk of these things, of the isolation, the rejection, anything to do with not having connection, it actually triggers the underlying brain pathways or neural pathways that are the same that are triggered when we experience physical pain. So it actually is like emotional pain, and it hurts.
I hope for all you listeners that are in lockdown right now that you're fine.
Oh, yes. Our hearts are going out to you. But the benefit is it doesn't need to be physical. It can be over the phone. It can be writing to someone. It can be a video conversation. And this is why it's really important that during lockdown, we don't forget that we need this. Because what often happens when we're in a state of uncertainty, anxiety, what this current environment is giving us, or rather what we're responding to it with, we often feel like we want to withdraw. When we're on this kind of negative side of the emotion spectrum, we want to withdraw from the world. But actually what we need is to reconnect with people. So that's a really important one and very easy to actually forget about, that we need others. So
What is
that's
that? Is that a glitch? A glitch in the
in,
brain which misinterprets something?
I wouldn't say it's a glitch. I would say I actually think it's the opposite of a glitch. I think it's there by design, because when we need help, who's going to help us? Other people. And so if we're not making the effort to build the connections, to foster the relationships, the connections, then when we really, at our hour of need, we won't be able to call on people. So I actually think it's there by design. I just feel like we have lost it because the way society has moved, again, is so individualistic. If you look at how it's designed, a lot of us are in these high-rise apartments. We don't even know our neighbors. As opposed to, if you think about how it used to be, it was community-based. You knew your neighbors. People would leave their doors unlocked.
There
There'd
were
be
no
lots of
walls.
support. There were no walls. They say it takes a village to raise a child. It's because the village raised the child. Nowadays, it's so foreign to even have that in mind because of just how the world has moved, which is why, having awareness is so important, because we can be the change we want to see. We can be that change if we recognize these things and take the steps that we need to take for ourselves. Then we get to change our world. And in doing that, we're going to be impacting and positively changing other people's worlds as well. So yeah, opposite of a glitch, I would say. Then we've got, so that's PERM from the PERMA model. This is the one we were talking about. I've given you like a very long answer to your question, but
That's all
I
right.
think this
Love
stuff
it.
is so important. Good, I'm so pleased. The next one is meaning. Meaning is basically answering the question of, what am I on this earth to do? And it can be a really, really big question for a lot of people to grapple with, because how are you supposed to know? Now, religion and spirituality give a lot of people that sense of meaning because they're told what their purpose is. And when you look at people who are really, truly spiritual, they have higher degrees of happiness and subjective well-being because they know when they wake up every morning, there is a purpose to what they're doing. They believe that the challenges and tests that they experience in life are there for their education and their training and to see what they turn to. But it doesn't have to come from that. A lot of the time, what we again know from the research is you need to think about, how can my life be of impact to others? And that's what it has to be. It has to be about something beyond yourself. So it can't just be about you proving to yourself what you're capable of.
And so
Unfortunately, go for it.
this point you're stating right now, that our life has to be for others, that conclusion comes from psychology research. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
In terms of what makes people the happiest and the most resilient.
Right. That's brilliant.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you
Yeah.
actually take time to reflect on it.
Dear listeners, it's not always easy to get clear on what we can actually do to help this world, how we can impact. This is why I've created a cheat sheet, your 10 superpowers to change the world right now. You can download it on www.futureseeds.news/superpowers.
Actually, it reminds me of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Admittedly, I haven't even read the whole thing. I think I only read some of it, and then I've watched interviews and I'm fascinated by it. But that in itself highlights the importance of meaning beyond the self. And so, I think a lot of the time, individuals who are really driven to succeed, they often feel like their sense of meaning is to succeed and to achieve and to, reach my potential. But again, what we know from the research is that this is not enough to keep you fulfilled and happy for the long term. And again, what often happens is I see it a lot in organizations with employees and leaders who have been advancing. Sometimes my senior most clients, the most senior leaders I work with, they come to me and they say, Shadé, I am really unhappy. I'm miserable at work. I don't know what's going on. I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. This has been my career trajectory. I wanted that role and I got it. And then I wanted to be that. And they've basically gotten to where they wanted to, and they're still not happy. And this really ties into that piece around, what are you driven by? And is that the right thing you should be driven by? A lot of us are goal driven, where we say, I want to achieve that. And when I achieve it, I will be happy.
Yeah, it's
And
almost
then,
like you have to set an unattainable goal on purpose.
yeah. And then what happens when you actually achieve that goal? Let's say, you set it and then you achieve it. Are you happy in the moment? Generally, you are. You have a slight spike in dopamine. Great, I've achieved my goal. But then, a couple of hours later, do you still feel that? Generally, no. And you think, uh-oh, what's going on? I need to set another goal. And so you start getting on this kind of treadmill of goal attainment, not realizing that achieving the goal is not going to bring you the lasting happiness.
It's funny because it is often recommended, though, this technique. Set really small steps and achieve, and you'll be happy.
Absolutely. And actually, it's great that you mentioned that, because that's step number 5 of this PERMA model. A is about achievement. And as humans, again, we know from research that we need to feel like we are progressing. We need to feel like we are moving towards something. So there is a big element around, when it comes to well-being and happiness, we need to be moving in some direction. But the problem is that we set the end destination as being that larger, higher purpose that we have. Like, I am going to buy 5 cars before I hit 30. That is my larger goal. And then day by day, as you move towards that, it might feel good, because we also know, so there's this fascinating research that's coming out of Huberman Lab. So Andrew Huberman, who's a neurobiologist from Stanford, him and his lab have been looking into what happens in the brain when it comes to goals. And they found that typically what we thought was that you have to set a goal, you have to achieve the goal, and then you get the shot of dopamine in your brain, which makes you feel really good. What they found is that you can also biohack that dopamine pathway, because generally what will happen is, if you've set the goal and you experience something really challenging, a lot of people give up because it's just too hard and the goal seems too far away, which means they're depriving themselves of the dopamine when they reach the goal. What the research has said is that if you have a higher purpose, a bigger purpose beyond yourself, and that end goal can still be part of that bigger purpose, but when you have that bigger purpose, when you face that, he calls it friction, the challenge, the obstacle, the stress, the tension, whatever it is, instead of saying, this is too hard, I'm giving up, you consciously say to yourself, this is part of the journey. I am on the right track towards the bigger, larger purpose that I'm working towards.
Good
and
hack.
It's such a simple one. And by doing that, you're actually biohacking the dopamine reward pathways so that the dopamine is released on the way to goal attainment, rather than just when you actually attain the goal. And it can give you the extra motivation, the extra momentum that you need, but you need to be really clear on that larger purpose. It's tapping into the why, why do you want to go and achieve that goal? And that's what we get down to, because we also know that your why, when we look at it from a neurological perspective, when you're super clear on your why, you're basically tapping into the emotion center in the brain. And the emotion center in the brain is really what drives motivation and momentum and passion and movement. We need to get super clear on that. So that's kind of the PERMA model, the 5 elements, which I think it helps you understand how they fit in and what we need. But it also makes you realize that if you don't have the other 4 and you're just thinking about meaning, what is the meaning of my life? It can sometimes become quite difficult, because then you're putting so much pressure on yourself to know.
Can you recap again each letter?
Yes,
so P
absolutely.
Was...
Good thinking. So P was positive emotion. E was engagement, being in a flow state, having some kind of cognitive, engaging task that makes you lose track of time. R was relationships. So making sure we're actually making time for people and building relationships. M was meaning. Again, having that meaning for living. And then A was achievement.
We can almost make a podcast per letter.
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, there'd be so much that you could explore within each of them.
It's so interesting. But there's a few things I'd like to focus on. One thing I'd like to say about the goals, though, is like, is this famous sentence I really like. I can't remember which famous author said it, but there's nothing more frustrating than climbing a ladder and realizing you were on the wrong wall.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one. I love that. Very visual.
Yeah, I think like with goal setting, like you say, having 5 cars before 30 or something, it's not lasting happiness even if you do realize that, if you do achieve that. One thing we spoke about in the pre-call was the inner critic and how that affects our life.
Yes. I'm so pleased you brought it up. The inner critic actually feeds really well into what we were just talking about, because what the inner critic is this voice that we have in our heads that reminds us we're not ready, we're not good enough, it's never going to work. It's filling us with self-doubt. And what we again know from a lot of the research is it actually is a subpersonality within us that shines a spotlight on all of our weaknesses and is by design meant to hold us back. It's trying to keep us safe and keep us protected, but it does that by paralyzing us from taking action. And so, what we started talking about in terms of comparison, comparing yourself to other people, that mental process that you have when you're doing the comparison, that's part of the inner critic. And what I've done, I've spent a bit of time looking at what is this inner critical voice and what characterizes it. And I've done that based on a lot of my clients. So based on what they share with me, based on what's driving these voices. And I've come to identify there are generally 5 main voices that we hear. And I'll take you through them very briefly. And as I'm going through them, think about whether any of them really speak to you, whether you think, gosh, yeah, I have this, it's really loud, or maybe I've had that one.
You said 5, I must have 6.
Yeah, maybe 10. There's actually other research that suggests there's many, many more. I'm keeping it narrow, but let's stick with the 5. So the first one is the classic judge. And the classic judge is that voice in your head that just is constantly judging you. What you did, what you didn't do, what you should have done. It criticizes every decision that you make. So you basically can never satisfy this particular critic that you have. It blames you for things that were completely out of your control. And again, fills you with self-doubt, makes you feel like you have nothing to offer. If you're a perfectionist, sometimes that falls within the realm of the classic judge, because with perfectionism, you set these impossibly high standards that you can't achieve. And then when you don't achieve them, you beat yourself up over them, and it just becomes this kind of negative spiral. So that's the classic judge. It's the most common. We then have the victim. And the victim's really interesting because people often don't self-identify with the victim, but other people will say, yes, that person has a victim mentality. And it's where, the victim feels powerless. So it's really pessimistic. It manifests in a complete lack of motivation and zero hope. It'll say things like, what's the point of even trying? It's really closely linked to ego. Actually, all of them are very closely linked to the ego. They just reflect the ego. But the victim is really very ready with the response of, well, it's not me, it's them. It's not me, it's the economy. It's not me, it's someone else. There's a lot of blame. And the victim doesn't want to take any personal responsibility. And it often waits to be rescued as well. So you can see why people don't like to self-identify with the victim, but other people close to them will be able to say, yeah, definitely, you've got this within you.
Shame
So then we have the
guilt.
protector. Yeah. Oh, massive. And the victim a lot of the time stems from they all stem from childhood, but the victim especially, this shame, this guilt, the fear of humiliation really stems from early experiences that you would have had as a child. And then that manifests in adulthood in certain environments. So then we have number 3 is the protector. And the protector is designed to protect you from harm, protect you from maybe failing or doing something that's not right. And so how that manifests is in a complete aversion to risk and basically fearing the possibility of failure. So then what does that do? That holds you back from taking action because you are too afraid just in case. And it undermines your confidence in your capabilities. So it completely paralyzes you. And it succeeds in keeping you safe because we know that if you never go outside of your comfort zone, you're going to stay comfortable, but you're also not going to be able to achieve and move forward. Number 4 is the ringmaster. And I see a lot of the ringmaster in very high performing people who have always had a history of high performance. I also see the ringmaster a lot in a lot of entrepreneurs who are out there on their own. And the ringmaster tells you that your value is based on how disciplined you are and what you deliver. It pushes you to keep on pushing because it's saying, well, you're only as valuable as the work that you do and how hard you work. And it convinces you that the moment that you slow down, you're weak and a failure. So it might push you to absolute burnout. It's also imposter syndrome often falls in this space. The ringmaster is saying they're going to find out that you're not good enough, that you shouldn't be here. So you need to work doubly as hard and try and compensate. And again, that can be really damaging, extremely damaging to your sense of self, your sense of confidence, your sense of happiness. And then number 5 is the neglector. And the neglector, again, some people don't necessarily self-identify. It's easier for others to be able to identify this in the neglector. So the neglector tells you that everyone else's needs are actually more important than yours. You're completely worthless. You don't deserve anything. You don't deserve time. You don't deserve attention. You don't deserve compliments. So you're very good at deflecting compliments if they come your way. You really do not feel worthy of care. So you're constantly prioritizing the needs of everyone around you. People pleasing might be a part of this as well, making sure everyone else is okay, but in doing so, neglecting yourself and neglecting what you need.
I swear you're just describing me with that list.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that's me. Oh, that's me too.
That, yeah.
That's, and this is the thing I love about these is that everyone will be able to relate to at least one of them. And what we find is that once you're aware of the critics, you actually start to notice. So one of the interesting things I've noticed with my clients is when I make them aware of their critics, it's good in the sense that they have the awareness. But then the downside is they start to become really aware of the fact that these voices are constantly taking over their ability to think rationally. And it becomes really concerning for them. And that can happen, when you're not aware of something, you're kind of blissfully ignorant. As soon as you become aware of it, you start to notice it and you realize the impact that it is actually having on your life. The decisions that you've made, the sense of fulfillment that you've had, the sense of value that you feel you offer. And then you start to think, oh no, exactly. And so that's why it's also really important to then say, okay, awareness is important, but then what do we do? How do we work through this?
Yes, Shadé, what's the antidote?
Yes, what is the antidote? I'm so pleased you asked. So look, we know that it's really important to have what do we do here about this? Because what happens is with these inner critics, they formed part of our sense of self, our sense of self-concept, which is how we see ourselves in relation to the world. There's also a theory of self-verification where we subconsciously want the world to see us how we see ourselves. So what could happen is that we become self-fulfilling prophecies to basically prove these inner critics right.
Oh, I'd go with that one, yes.
It's really, really important to be aware of and quite mind-expanding when you realize that. Because then by not doing anything, you are literally becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy and nothing will change. So then let's look at what we actually do.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Part 2 of this interview will be released in episode 22. Shadé and I will be discussing strategies to deal with our inner critics. We'll be sharing how we view compassion in relation to mental strategies, the core principles that make purpose a worthwhile pursuit, and how we can manage all different parts of our life without having one of them crumble. The Future Seeds podcast is a project that is supported by its community of listeners. If you like the show and what it stands for, I invite you to head to www.futureseeds.news, where you can support the show for just $2 a month, be part of the Future Seeds community, connect with its amazing members and speakers, and enable this podcast to thrive. I thank you for your time and hope you enjoy the show and its exploration of alternative solutions to the world's greatest challenges.